Hello, BookTube. Well, believe it or not, July is right around the corner, and that means it's time for TBR videos to show up in your feed. I've seen a few of them myself. There was one from Sarah at Steeped in Books that was great. The Mighty Olive did one. I'm sure I'll see plenty of others. They're one of my favorite kinds of videos on BookTube. And I wanted to make a video myself, but a normal TBR doesn't really work. For me, I plan to read, for instance, in July of 2019, I plan to read well over 100 books. I can't put that on one video, obviously. And a lot of the ones that I plan to read in July I haven't read yet. So, which is a typical TBR. So what I tend to do on this channel is a TBR BY, to be read by you, where I make, instead of doing a normal TBR, I recommend 10 books from July that I've already read that I think you might like. I try to keep a broad variety of different kinds of genres, and I want to view it as kind of the equivalent of if we were in a new bookstore in July together, and you could just point at books on the tables and say, well, this is new. What did you think of this? Or this is new. You read ahead. Was this any good? Or that sort of thing. So I've done that. I've made a list, and I thought we'd jump right into it We'll start with science fiction and fantasy. And the first one of those that I want to recommend is a book called Wanderers. No idea why it's called Wanderers. It's a very bland and derivative title. But it's by Chuck Wendig, and it's like 1,000 pages long, and it's something that I was originally predisposed against because of his idiotic behavior on social media. And then I realized, of course, the simple thing that shouldn't have taken me any time to realize, which is that doesn't matter. That doesn't have any effect on the book unless he's going to reflect being a jerk in the book. And to my great relief, he does not. Wanderers is a big post-apocalyptic novel, very much along the lines of Stephen King's The Stand, about a small group of misfits trying to understand this weird dystopian world. And despite the fact that it is very familiar territory, I really liked its execution. I thought it was done really well. And there's another book on the list. The next book on the list is also very familiar territory, a very familiar setup, that is nevertheless done really well. So that's all I ask. I don't care that the setup's not original. It's Dragonslayer by an author named Duncan Hamilton. I believe the whole of the trilogy has already come out in the UK. But this is the first appearance of the first volume in America. And it's the familiar setup is that once upon a time, dragons in this world were common and horrible marauding animals, and that they were fought by dragon slayers, and that dragon slayers were therefore praised, they were prized, and that now that dragons have largely disappeared, dragon slayers aren't held in anywhere near that kind of esteem, and you can see what's coming. You can see that that's going to mean that when dragons make their reappearance, our down-at-heel hero, who's a dragon slayer, is suddenly going to find himself far more active and far more differently considered by his peers. Do you want to come up here? They'd love to see you. Come on. There you go. It's the execution that I like. It was really well done, so I want to recommend it to you. And the last science fiction that I want to recommend is This Is How You Lose the Time War, which is by Amal, el-Mohtar, and Max Gladstone. And ordinarily, I don't particularly like time travel stories. I know that puts me in the minority for science fiction fans. And I ordinarily don't like collaborations. I can ordinarily see the seam where one writer stops and the other starts easily. I've been part of literary collaborations enough times in my life to be able to see that seam. And it distracts. And I didn't see that much evidence of two warring egos here. Instead, it's a terrific story that is both a time travel story and also almost necessarily an alternate reality story, and also a bit of dystopian thrown in there, and also somehow or other our two authors managed to work in a love story in the midst of all that. It is just prime inventiveness on every page science fiction, so I wanted to recommend it. Then we'll move on to fiction, and quite a bit of the fiction that I want to recommend this time around is historical fiction. This has been a banner BookTube. Eyes on the prize. Okay? I'm the cute one. Quite a bit of the historical fiction in 2019. We've got more of it than in any other year, and it's been really good. And quite a few of the books for fiction that I want to recommend are historical fiction, including The Golden Hour by Beatriz Williams, which is the story of the Duke and Duchess of Windsor after the Duke of Windsor abdicated the English throne in order to marry her. once that happened, he had to be shuttled out of England, and a job had to be found for him elsewhere, in this case in the Bahamas. And while they were there was a murder. And Beatrice Williams finds that murder in, the details of biographies of the Duke and Duchess, and makes a terrific story out of it. Just terrific. What's the matter, baby? What's the matter? Huh? What's the matter? Why don't you lay down, baby girl? Oh, you warm? Oh. She's warm now. Wait till she sees what's going to happen when we go on our walk. It's warm outside. Anyway, I wanted to recommend that, and along the same lines, I want to recommend another collaboration. This one is by Hazel Gaynor and Heather Webb, and it's called Meet Me in Monaco. And it's a novel about Grace Kelly and Prince Rainier of Monaco. And I came to it through a circuitous route. I had it on my shelf for a long time, the advance copy. But I recently reread Anthony Burgess's review of Sarah Bradford's biography of Grace of Monaco. And I was struck by the literacy and the grace of the review. It clearly brought out something in Burgess that he doesn't always show in his book reviews. And that review sent me back to Sarah Bradford's biography, which I liked a lot better than the first time I read it. And then I thought, oh, wait a minute, you have a novel about Grace of Monaco. Why don't you read that? And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. It's called Meet Me in Monaco, and I strongly recommend it. I think it will be a paperback release in July. Then another historical novel that I want to recommend is Dragonfly. I mentioned it on this channel before, and I recommended it then. It's Leila Meacham's story, big, textured, totally involving page-turner about a group of espionage agents during World War II, and also something that happened during one of their key, most tragic missions that may not have been what it seemed, and that they're learning about it 20 years later. Just, again, a familiar kind of plot structure, but so well done. So well done. And while we're on the subject of historical fiction, I also want to mention something that won't be characterized as historical fiction. It'll be reviewed on the front page of the New York Times Book Review. It'll be reviewed everywhere. And it won't be done the reviews won't be done by specialists in historical fiction. And that is The Nichol Boys, the new novel by Colson Whitehead, that comes out in July, and that is set at the bitter final days of Jim Crow South, where two very different boys, are sent to a brutal reform school in Florida that isn't a school and that isn't meant to reform. It's meant to simply brutalize. It's worse than any kind of prison could be. The book is historical, of course, but it also struck me as very different, even from The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead. It struck me as there are new tonal registers in this book that I don't think this author has ever really tried. Certainly that he's never really put this much weight on. It's an angrier book, a more impressive book. I loved it. I do strongly recommend it. I think it will probably be the best work of quote-unquote serious literary fiction that is published in July. Unless items come from behind and surprise me. But then the last one that I want to recommend is set in small town Wisconsin. And I didn't expect to love it as much as I did. I thought it was fantastic. It's called Bad Axe County by John Galligan. And it's set in the eponymous, very, very small Wisconsin town that has its first female sheriff, a woman named Heidi Kick, who... the secondary characters, the description of small town life, the description of the natural world, all are wonderfully done. But she towers over the book. She's a fantastic creation. She's the thing that makes me want to recommend the book. So it's gritty, it's a police procedural, it's grisly in times. So keep that in mind. It's as far away from Meet Me in Monaco as you could possibly get. But I wanted to recommend it among fiction points. And then we'll move on to romance. Can't do a TBR BY without romance. The first one I want to recommend is by Debbie Macomber, and it is Window on the Bay. And it's a novel about one of the things that struck me about it, that I really liked about it, is that it's not about two carefully sculpted, gym-toned, hot young things. Instead, it's about a woman who was married for a long time to a surgeon and then divorced him, and now her children have grown up and moved out, and she's on her own and is naturally thinking along the lines of self-reinvention, of maybe expanding her horizons just a bit now that her duties are done to husband and children. And in the course of the book, set up like that, that the author is going to reintroduce the possibility of love. And when it comes, it's another surgeon. It's the very area that burned her the first time. So that was well done. I never miss a novel by this author, and I think they're all wonderful. They're very much back porch reading, very satisfying. reading. There'll be no real grit. There'll be no real tragedy. They're meant to be enjoyed. The next one I want to recommend is a debut. I've mentioned it on this channel before. I've praised it on this channel before, I think. It's The Plus One by Sarah Archer, about a young woman who is so tired of a disappointing dating life and of disappointing men that she decides to build one of her own. She's a computer intelligence specialist, and she builds a mechanical man of her own, and just so she'll have somebody to go to parties with and be in photos with for her friends on Facebook and whatnot. And the natural thing happens, which is that she builds better than she knows and starts to fall in love with him. All of a sudden, she starts finding reasons to have him on and operating. The book is a totally predictable riff on the Pygmalion myth, but I loved it anyway. Just loved it anyway. You will too. So, and also, when it comes to romance, the last romance that I want to recommend is The Rogue to Ruin. Not The Road to Ruin, but The Rogue to Ruin by Vivienne Lorret. And this is the Misadventures in Matchmaking #3, and it follows How to Forget a Duke and 10 Kisses to Scandal. I think we saw How to Forget a Duke on this channel, and 10 Kisses to Scandal was great. A fantastic book. These are all about the Bourne Matrimonial Agency. You might have heard me talk about these with the last 2 installments in the series. The Bourne Matrimonial series, they're Regency novels, but the Bourne Matrimonial Agency seeks to match husband and wife, and the #1 rule in the agency is that you must not fall in love with your client. So of course everybody at the Bourne Matrimonial Agency does. They're falling in love with their clients left, right, and center. And this is another example of just how well this author is doing this. I don't know if the Misadventures in Matchmaking series is going to go on, but I hope it does. I really hope it does. Sometimes you get these in historical, these modern regencies, you will get a gimmick, all the men in one club, all the women on one block, that sort of thing, that does work, and sometimes you'll get one that doesn't. And when it doesn't, I'm perfectly happy for it to be 3 books, and then the author tries something new. When it does work, like some of you will remember Mary Bailow's series about Napoleonic War survivors, one of whom is blind, and not all of whom are ex-soldiers, and how each one of them falls in love. That was a series I could have seen going on forever. And this is the same thing. As long as the books are this good, I'm perfectly happy to have all of the Bourne Matrimonial Agency trip over themselves. But anyway, that's romance. Then we come to history, and I'm going to surprise you here by recommending only one book. It's Fire and Fortitude by John McManus. And it is a Pacific War history, a World War II Pacific theater history, it goes from 1941 to 1943, only, so I'm thinking there's going to be a second volume. And it concentrates on the U.S. Army in the Pacific War, which is a rarity. Usually, as the author points out, the bulk of the attention is given to the U.S. Navy during World War II. And the author points out rightly what a huge role the Army played. So it's not for everybody. It's not even for all World War II fans, because it is regimental. It is regimental and up. It's a very boots and bolts type of history. It's a big fat book. Comes out in July. I thought it was really well done, but it's not going to be even for every World War II fan. So judge accordingly, because these TBRBYs are also recommendation lists for people that not just for you and not just for me, but if you know a World War II fan, or are one, who's not just a fan of the big broad sweeping books but also the specific stuff, especially if you know an Army vet, this is a no-brainer. Then we'll move on to biography. We won't stray far from World War II to start with, because the biography that I want to recommend the most is David Roll's new biography of George Marshall. It's a huge book about the author of the Marshall Plan and about the architect of victory for large chunks of World War II. And it's the biography that Marshall's been waiting for, just without knowing it. David Roll's previous book on Harry Hopkins I really, really liked. I thought it was... I remember thinking when I read it, this is exactly how it should be done. This is how you do it. You master an enormous amount of sources, and then you remember to tell an interesting story. The fact that you mastered your sources isn't enough alone. You have to remember to tell an interesting story, and he does. This book is 10 times better. Even as good as that last one was, this one is 10 times better. It's one of the... I don't know. It's only June, so I'm not sure, but I find it hard to believe it won't be on my list of best biographies for the year. Although now is the wrong time for me to predict that, because the autumn I'm going to get bombarded with biographies that I don't know are coming. The autumn is the season for them. But while we're on biography, I want to recommend 2 more. The next one is something we saw on this channel before. This is James Grant's biography of Bagehot. This is he calls Bagehot the greatest Victorian. I don't know that that's exactly true, but he was a polymath and an incredible thinker and a very influential writer, and hasn't had a biography in forever in the popular press, and I doubt we'll ever have one again. So any chance to recommend. And the other thing I want to recommend is also a great Victorian, and it's Christopher Benfey's book If, which is about the years that Rudyard Kipling spent writing in Vermont. People don't know or tend to forget that a lot of Kipling's most famous stuff was written in Vermont, and this book goes over that period and does it in just enough detail. I think if you were to I myself would have wanted it to be twice as long, but I think for most readers, if you'd gone into any greater detail, you'd have started to lose them. I think that line is walked very carefully in this book. So I want to recommend all three of those. One, World War II, two Victorians. Then we'll move on to Science and Nature. I think we've seen one of these before, but I want to recommend two slight oddities first. And the first one will be one of the oddest Science and Nature books that I read this year, but so good. So good. I want to get it right. It's called The Shadows Moving in the Moon's Skull Eyes. It's by Don Lago, and it is, believe it or not, one of 2019's bumper crop of books about the Apollo 11 mission, about the first men walking on the moon. It's a tiny little thing, a sliver compared to all the other books that I've read and reviewed on the moon landings. And it is told from the moon's point of view. It's told from the moon's point of view. The only other book in the season that I've seen do that is a kid's book that talks about the moon finally having human friends. And it's poetic in its prose, but it's also filled with fascinating science about the moon, about what it is, about what a kind of a place it was before humans ever showed up. Just utterly delightful. I don't remember the publisher. I didn't jot it down. It's probably not a big publisher. You probably have to hunt around for it in your bookstore, but see if you can get your library to order a copy, because you're really going to like it. It's not like any moon book you're going to read this year. And then the next one is also odd. I think we've seen it on this channel before. It's Linda Godfrey's book, I Know What I Saw. And it's her rundown of some of the great urban myths and cryptozoology stories of modern times. So giant dogmen, giant cats in British Columbia and in Canada and in England and in America, UFOs, giant lake monsters, Bigfoot, of course, all sorts of stuff like that. And the author is perfectly willing to put her chips on the table. She is perfectly willing to write in detail about her own Bigfoot sightings, and not tongue-in-cheek, and not, I had too much whiskey or whatever, but genuinely, I am familiar with being outside. I have been hiking many, many times and never seen anything even remotely like, and then one day I saw something, and I do not know what it was. I wasn't imagining it. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a rock. It wasn't a rock in the shape of a bear. It wasn't a bear in the shape of a rock. To use the old Huck Howey description from F Troop. Turn left at the bear that looks like a rock. Turn right at the rock that looks like a bear. The original members of the Huck Howey tribe become lost in the wilderness, and when they look around, they say, "Where the heck are we?" That's how they got their name. But anyway, it's a tremendously fun book because it grants a certain amount of weight to the huge body of circumstantial evidence of eyewitness accounts for all of these things. So if you're into that sort of thing, cryptozoology, it's one of the books to get this year. And the next one, speaking of Bigfoot, you knew I had to mention this one more time. It's In the Valleys of the Noble Beyond by John Zada. One of the greatest Bigfoot books that's ever been written, because it is one of the most, it's not only poetically written, but it's also, it doesn't start off with any kind of predisposition. Really, I Know What I Saw doesn't either. But in the Valleys of the Noble Beyond, the author goes to an extremely remote and wild area where at least it is at least theoretically possible that there could be a large species of anthropoid that would still be around that no one has actually documented. It's at least theoretically in a tiny way possible. And he's going to see whether or not that's the case. And whether, I won't spoil anything about the final chapters of the book, but no matter how the book comes out, it is so much worth your time to read. It is so good. So that's science and nature. And then I want to wrap up with just general nonfiction, and with two pairs, the two books that sort of go in pairs. The first of the pair is This Land by Christopher Ketchum, which is his debut nonfiction work. I've just read it. We saw it on this channel. I hadn't read it then. And it's about the American West. It's about public ownership of the American West. It's about millionaires and billionaires and also government agencies buying up public lands at a huge rate. And what that means for the nature of the American West, which is, as the author points out, formatively important in the American psyche. Just a tremendously well-written and well-done book. And right next to it on the same subject is something we've also seen on this channel, Anthony McCann's book, Shadowlands, which is about Eamon Bundy and his armed standoff with the United States government over private grazing of cattle on public lands. So the two books go together. I would be willing to bet that in the course of July's book reviewing season, I will see them reviewed together, at least in one or two places, because any book editor who bothers to study them, especially, well, any book editor who bothers to read the descriptions of them is going to see that they make a natural pair. I was going to say any book editor who reads, but a lot of book editors are too busy to do this kind of thing. A lot of book editors are way too busy to read a substantial number of July's books before July comes out. In the past and in the present, some of them have found me rather useful in that regard. But that's the first pair, Shadowlands and This Land, both about the American West. So if, for instance, you live in the American West, they're both really imperative reading. And then we'll finish up with another pairing, also disturbing. The first one is It Came From Something Awful by Dale Barron. I think we saw that on this channel before. And it's his history of 4chan, of the website 4chan. Not the current 4chan so much as the old, unregulated, totally Wild West 4chan. And he dips a little into other kinds of websites like that, largely unmonitored and unfiltered places where people can go to express radical views. There's less of that now on 4chan than there used to be, but in the past, 4chan is where all kinds of seedy people would go. Nazis, fascists, white nationalists, child molesters, that sort of thing. And there were 4chan discussion threads for anybody. And this author makes some elaborate claims about what 4chan culture and 4chan itself did to American society, including, as the book's subtitle suggests, electing Donald Trump. Well, no matter what you make of those claims, whether or not those claims strike you as right, the book is it's soiling, but it is fascinating to do. So, worth reading if that's the sort of thing that you want to try and understand. And soiling and fascinating is a perfect description of our next book, which is Proud Boys and the White Ethno-State by Alexandra Minna Stern. It's a slim book, and it is devastatingly good, just devastating, where the author examines the world. The Proud Boys is a racist, skinhead, violent gang that was founded by I guess you could call him conservative show host. He's actually nothing of the kind. He doesn't have any political views. He just wants money and is willing to excite whatever kind of violence he can do to get it, named Gavin McManus, who, if you were to ask him, would go straight into completely concentrated lie mode and say that each of the individual things I just used to describe the group he founded, fascist, violent gang, he would immediately say that all of those things are not true. That none of those are true. It's a gentleman's club. That's all it is. It's a gentleman's club. No, there's no such thing as initiation by violence. There's no such thing as initiation by racism or anti-Semitism or anything like that. No. It's nothing like that. It's just a gentleman's club. We're proud to be white Americans. We're proud to be white Europeans of white European descent. And that's all a lie. That it's all a lie, and it's meant to be. The alt-right, the new alt-right, is very glib and very practiced in the lies it tells about itself. So this is the okay sign. Right? Of course it is. Oh, come on. You don't believe what you read online, do you? Of course it is. No, this is just me saying okay. Yes, I'm bending over and I'm doing it like this, but that's just because I didn't have room on the camera. Come on. It's just an okay sign. And on and on. All that kind of stuff. You won't get all of that in this book, but you will get as much as you can take about disaffected, self-radicalizing, radicalized white youth. And the author concentrates mostly on America, but it's true all over the Western world, and scary all over the Western world. And the book is tremendously good. It's just a syringe of acid into your veins. So I wanted to recommend all of those. That will wrap up my July TBR BY. There's only one more book I want to mention because I can't get it out of my head. It's an author I love, Adrian McKinty. He did Dead I Well May Be, and he did a bunch of other novels that are all really good, gritty Irish police procedurals. His new book is something different, and I haven't been able to forget it, even though it's hyper-manipulative. It clearly doesn't want me to be able to forget it. It's called The Chain, and I don't know that I can recommend it. That's why I'm mentioning it last and sort of off in a category of its own. It's a thriller, but I don't know what I think about it. Parents have a child abducted. They're distraught. They're in panic mode. They are contacted by the abductors. The abductors say, you can have your child back safe and sound as soon as you abduct the child of someone else. Once the someone else whose child you have abducted successfully abducts another child, you can have your child back, safe and sound. And of course, it's a totally outrageous premise, but it got to me. It really did. It got to me. So it might get to you. So I thought I would mention, you're going to see it in bookstores, I'm sure. The publisher is probably thinking, they're probably hoping, sooner or later, Adrian McKinty is such a fantastic writer. They're probably thinking, sooner or later, something's going to break him out into the bigger world. Something's going to do that sooner or later. And this could be it. This could be the thing that happens. And the another thing that I want to mention, I don't think I wrote it on this list. Is that possible? I just didn't write it down. It's coming to my mind now. I can't remember how close we are to our limit of books. No, will you look at that? It's not on there. Well, I can recommend it anyway because I just finished it, and it's fantastic, of course. It's by Mark Greaney, whose Gray Man series I have recommended on this channel many times. He has a co-writer for this book. I forget the co-writer's name. He's a Marine. I don't remember his name. And I didn't get the impression reading the book that he does much. He might have just done logistical support because the book very much reads like a Mark Greaney novel. And it's called Red Metal. And it's sort of a World War III novel, or a limited sense of World War III, where Russia wants to corner the market on precious metals used in the computing trade all over the world. And they do it militarily. They attack those countries sort of in quasi-unison, and it throws the West back on their heels. They don't quite know what to do in response. And there's a small group of heroes that are in the forefront of that response. But those of you who have read Mark Greaney will know what to expect already. He does action really well, and his books are all action. And Red Metal is terrific. I don't know I didn't get the impression that it was part of a series, but maybe it is. I have an Unbound Galley Advance. I don't. It's not within reach, so I can't grab it for you. I feel bad that I can't mention the author's name, the co-author's name. But I'm going to list all these books down below, so I will mention it there. But I can't believe I didn't put it on this list. But I strongly recommend it. It is tremendously fun. So that's it. That is our July TBR BY for 2019. So this video has gone on way too long. All my videos today are long. But I'm going to wrap this up, and if I don't remember to jot down these books, please remind me. And I will be back soon. Thank you, BookTube.